Welcome to an event which, over the last days, has been often challenging, sometimes fascinating, occasionally infuriating, but I think always intriguing. And for those who wonder where this conference is going, all I'd like to say is that I was at a meeting this morning of festival directors from around the world, where I heard proposals and ideas about the events which will take place over the course of the next 12 months. Events which have been inspired by the conversations that have been taking place these last few days, and which, although I can't reveal the content of them, I can tell you will mean that these conversations will continue all around the world, in every different continent, for at least 12 months to come. The conferences that we spoke to, the festivals we spoke to this morning were based in Russia, India, Portugal, China, Canada, Trinidad, France, and Congo. And I just wanted to point out, I hope they're in the audience, a couple of the people who are organizing those. So Alex Pearson, are you there, from the Beijing Book Room? Stand up so we can see. This is Alex Pearson from Beijing. Jeffrey Taylor from International Festival of Authors Toronto. Welcome. And the novelist Michel Lebris, who is one of our speaker delegates, but he also runs the Étonnant Voyageur Festival in Saint-Malo and Brazzaville in Congo. Let me tell you, their ideas are stunning, and it's going to be fantastic what they do. So whatever happens here today, the conversation will continue beyond. And I think we've started a conversation which will help writers rethink why the novel matters. And I think it's important to remember that that's what we're trying to achieve with this conference. So, on to today's session, and I'd like to introduce today's chair, Chika Unigwe. She was born in Nigeria, but she now lives in Belgium. And she first burst onto the writing scene in 2003 when she won the BBC short story competition. And she was later, in 2004, nominated for the Kane Prize. Her first novel, De Phoenix, was published in 2005 in Dutch, and it was the first book of fiction by a Flemish author of African origin. Her second novel, also in Dutch, was called On Black Sister Street, and it's set against the backdrop of prostitution in Antwerp. And her latest book, Night Dancer, presents a vista of Nigeria over the past half century. Please give a warm welcome to Chika Unigwe.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. On Black Sister Street was published in English. Just, not Dutch. Am I turned on? Okay, I meant the microphone, so. Okay, that's good. You're all turned on, that's fine. Last night I had a really, really disturbing dream. So in my dream I had Woody Allen doing some really disturbing things, which I'm not going to mention. And so while Woody Allen was doing this really disturbing thing he was doing, he kept asking me, do you know the definition of an artist? An artist is someone who breaks all rules. That's what an artist is. I don't know why he was telling me this. I don't know why I had Woody Allen in my dream, but I think it's, I woke up and I thought, babe, I'm really beeping nervous about today. And then I think I listened to the BBC News this morning, and Burma has abolished its censorship on the media. So I think someone in Myanmar was really scared I would say something bad about them. So, good for us. Well, it's a privilege to welcome all of you to the Edinburgh Writers' Festival. And this conference is presented by the Edinburgh International Book Festival and the British Council, and supported by the Scottish Government, Creative Scotland, City of Edinburgh Council, and Event Scotland. I don't know if you noticed, but I had a problem pronouncing Edinburgh. I grew up on a road called Edinburgh Road in Enugu, and for a very long time I didn't know how to pronounce it. I still don't. First off, a few things before we start. The format for today's discussion will pretty much follow the format of the previous discussions. So we have a keynote speaker. After his speech, there will be an open debate amongst the 50 writers in the room who are all participating in the Writers' Conference, but also the audience. And so both the audience here and the audience online. There is Anna is here. monitoring the audience online. There are translators for our Norwegian and South Korean delegates, so please feel free to use them. And can I also ask that you put your hands up and wait until you have the microphone in your hand before speaking so that you're clearly heard. And also please speak really loudly because the air conditioner is on, I've been told, and so it's a bit noisier today than it's been the previous days. And also please tell us who you are before you make your contribution. Today's event will be simultaneously broadcast online and recorded. Henry Kunzru, who is the delegate, will be joining us online, right? Yeah, okay. He should be, okay. And John Burnside has kindly agreed to be the rounder-up for today. And so he'll summarize the points in 5 minutes. No, please do remember to keep your mobile phones switched off or on vibration for the duration of this event. And at the end of the event, Patrick and I will be available for book signings, should anybody be inclined to buy our books. Today's topic is censorship today. In 1962, a similar event was chaired by Mary McCarthy, and she began by stating her belief that most writers and audience would be against censorship, and that it is much harder to argue the case against censorship than it is for censorship. I mean, of course, those who censor are convinced that they are right. And censorship is as much a topical issue today as it was in 1962. I mean, think of the Pussy Rioters, the Pussy Riot girls, women, I'm sorry. And Switzerland is one of 7 countries to recently ban the latest issue of the magazine Dazed and Confused. I don't know if you know it, because it has the photograph of Azealia Banks, who is a musician, in front of it with, on the cover, blowing up a bright pink condom, and then with the words written underneath, Azealia Banks blows up. In the US, the American Library Association received challenges to ban a few hundred books every year. And in 2010, I think they banned Tango Makes Three because the penguin hero has 2 fathers. In Nigeria, Kano State set up a censorship board in 2001 to oversee the activities of filmmaking, cinemas, viewing centers, internet cafes, and all literary works intended for sale, distribution, or circulation in Kano State. Authors, filmmakers, booksellers, vendors, poster sellers are among those who are required by law to register with the board, or in the words of the board, be liable to the wrath of the relevant provision of the law. And China topped the list of the enemies of the internet published in Reporters Without Borders in March this year. And at least 35 writers, according to PEN, in China are in prison because of what they've written. And the list goes on and on. The Ugandan writer Doreen Bengana, speaking at a TEDx Nairobi event, tells the anecdote of her young cousin in Canada who is hanging out with her non-black friends. And at some point, one of her friends uses the N-word. And another friend tells this other friend, do not use the N-word when there's an N-word in the room. And so is censorship a matter of context? Does freedom of expression come with a responsibility? Is there such a thing as freedom to offend? Is the opposite of freedom of speech totalitarian censorship? I hope that we can have, with plenty of audience participation, of course, a robust debate on the C word. And I'd like to echo what John Calder, who was one of the organizers in 1962, said 50 years ago. We are imposing no prohibitions on the free expression of opinion, however controversial or unusual. So please do bear that in mind. There is no censorship today. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Patrick NESS. Patrick was born a virgin. I mean, I'm sure he was born a virgin, but he was born in Virginia, I'm sorry. But I'm sure he was born in Virginia. Anyway, so I'm sorry, Patrick. He was born in Virginia, and, but he had a nomadic childhood, growing up in different places. He's a marathon runner. You can't find that on Wikipedia, right? But I heard someone saying it. So Patrick is a marathon runner, the best-selling author of 6 novels for both adults and teenagers, and has won the Carnegie Medal, the Galaxy National Book Award, and the Children's Fiction Prize. Mr. Patrick NESS, please.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Yes, good. Yeah, good. You can all hear me. I have quite a soft voice, so I will try to project. In my mind, I think of myself as sort of really strong and really difficult. And then I saw the video of the conference a couple of days ago, and I sounded so gentle. So I don't think that's a bad thing. Just a couple of things before I begin, which is one that probably doesn't need to be said. It's tautologist, but I can only speak from my own point of view. I was born in America, I've lived in England. That's the point of view from which I'm going to speak on censorship. I can't help it. Why would I try to speak from any other point of view? But there are clearly, the great thing about an international writers' conference is that there will be all of these experiences about censorship, so that's one thing. The second thing is that, like Adolf Suef on Friday, I always give speeches from notes rather than reading, but since this is being published, I'm going to read it, so it'll be slightly different and not quite as comfortable as I usually am, but here we go. Censorship today. I had intended to open this polemic with some version of the following true story. Earlier this summer, I was having dinner with friends, and our conversation turned to the role of the veil in Islam, starting with how to explain a burqa to a son raised to believe that men and women are equal, before leading into the veil's potential as a form of oppression against women. The friends I was having dinner with were two women, one Palestinian raised in Jordan, the other English raised as a Muslim, and as our conversation progressed, it turned into how, for a number of reasons, some of them perhaps very good, it is far easier for them to discuss the issue of the veil publicly than me, a white Western male, no matter how nuanced or well-intentioned my views on the subject. It sounds like a recitation. This is much different than I usually am. Now, this is exactly the kind of thing that I want to talk about today, are the things we disallow ourselves to discuss. But a funny thing happened. I found myself drafting and redrafting the way I opened with that anecdote again and again and again, working so hard to make sure that my role in that conversation was clearly understood and therefore impossible to misunderstand, that I found myself pounding the sentences into such painfully careful neutrality that they would end up meaning almost nothing. But why? Why did I obviously think such care necessary, even while being painfully aware of this being a polemic about censorship? Part of my hesitation is, of course, a genuine impulse not to be in any way racist, a truly held wish to accommodate cultures and views not my own. There's also a desire, an equal desire, not to have this polemic just be another tediously calculated controversy, like the kind Martin Amis always pulls out when he's got a new paperback on the way. Oh, good, yes, good. She was talking about the C word. I could happily use it here. But if I'm honest, isn't part of my hesitation also fear? Fear of having what I'd say about the Islamic veil, no matter how thoughtfully I'd said it, misappropriated, misquoted, or badly paraphrased in the inevitable tweeting that's going on right now. Fear of having my words turned into something they aren't, and having to suffer the consequences, because the price of being misunderstood is very high. In the online world, nothing can be unsaid, and nothing is off the record. And once you're forced, fairly or not, to start saying something like, "I'm not a racist," haven't you lost the legitimacy of your voice forever? And is that something a writer can risk? But what I've done, though, by being so careful, by even perhaps keeping silent on the issue of the veil or any other issue, is I've disallowed myself a real voice in the conversation. I, who consider myself a brave writer, one unafraid to push boundaries, to speak truth to power, I who believe these things about myself as much as any of you do, I have, in this instance, self-censored in a polemic about self-censorship. And my argument to you today is that paradoxically, this form of censorship, self-censorship, is only on the increase in a connected age where every voice is heard. What we disallow ourselves to discuss, I fucking hate reading this thing. But what we disallow ourselves to discuss, sometimes for good reason, yes, but sometimes for bad reason, can curtail our voices as effectively as any government or corporation ever could. That's my thesis. Now, the larger issue of censorship, as Chika mentioned, by those very governments and corporations is still obviously a huge one. Obviously it is. But what I faced with this polemic is what Mary McCarthy faced in 1962 when she delivered it. And she said, and I'll also quote her, she said, "I imagine it has occurred to the audience that there is not going to be much problem with today's topic as there can't be too much disagreement." 50 years later, she's still right. I could easily had given an impassioned 15-minute talk of how book banning in schools remains a persistent threat in the US even in 2012. I could have talked about China's censorship of the internet. I could have spoken of the hate tweets to Tom Daley or Louise Mensch, or about Fabrice Muamba, or the disgrace of the Pussy Riot trial, or about Great Britain's own problems with censorship, its outdated libel laws, its alarming flair for super injunctions, its plans for secret courts, and on and on and on. Censorship has not left the world. It only finds new avenues. But as in 1962, these are all easy things to rise in opposition to, without much risk, without possibly even disagreement. Would we agree here today that Salman Rushdie has the right to produce the Satanic Verses? Would we agree that his recent experience, unfortunate experience during the Jaipur Literary Festival, is a depressing blow against free speech? There might be a few dissenters, but I suspect on the whole, we'd rally around Rushdie and loudly and proudly claim our right and willingness to speak on any issue at any time. But would we be correct? Ask yourself, truthfully, would you sit down tomorrow morning and start writing a novel with Muhammad as your central character? A Muhammad treated as a fallible man rather than a prophet. A Muhammad perhaps even criticized. You're comfortable even I'm suggesting it, aren't you? This is a different question than should you be able to write this book? Because I suspect, again, that we would probably agree here in this room, if perhaps less so in the world at large, that of course you should, if the need to tell that story was great enough. That has to be the only dictation for a story. But who here actually would? Or consider something more benign, at least on the surface. However ashamed you might be to admit it, has the threat of a bad sex award ever made you pause while writing a sex scene? And if you're international and haven't heard of it, you're lucky, folks. It's entered my mind, and frankly, it pissed me off. I wrote the scene anyway, of course, but even the thought that I'd momentarily hesitated made me angry. For the record, I loathe the bad sex award. I think it started as a funny idea, but in order to gain headlines and get writers like Haruki Murakami on the list, the otherwise intelligent people who, I hesitate to say judge it, have to temporarily pretend they understand neither context nor tone. Oh, I will just bet you one of those judges is here today. I'll just bet you that, sir. So rather than what the Bad Sex Award could be, a discussion on how sex can be written honestly, it is instead an occasion for tittering and humiliation of the most public school kind. However, having said that, have I now guaranteed that every bit of sex I might ever write will automatically be scrutinized by the Bad Sex Award? Does that enter my mind before writing a sex scene or criticizing the award itself? Do I have to make the conscious decision not to self-censor rather than write freely, which is what I believe an artist should do? What about, actually this is quite funny, because what my sentence actually says is, what about if you're here today among what is probably a fairly politically liberal gathering, which if you've been to the last 3 days, you know this is a hilarious understatement. What about if you're here today among what is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, a fairly politically liberal gathering? What if you're here in this group and you believe deeply in the freedoms that I argue for, freedom of speech, the battle against censorship, but what if you are also, say, against abortion? For you, it's a moral position you can't budge. No matter how socially liberal you otherwise consider yourself to be, in your heart, you believe abortion to be the taking of a life. Would you venture to speak that opinion here? Would you write a work of art that espoused that opinion? Now, this is interesting because I suspect you might not. But what if you did? What if you expressed that opinion here in a thoughtful but clear way? That opinion would have consequences, wouldn't it? We'd like to pretend it wouldn't. I imagine we here think of ourselves as open-minded and accommodating to points of view other than our own. But how would an anti-abortion writer be received in a group like this? Politely, respectfully, I'd imagine. But within that politeness, would that writer's opinions on other topics be ignored because some of us would secretly think that he or she is not one of us? Not really. Because this is the other self-censoring problem growing with the interconnectedness of the world. Instead of bringing us all together in an omnipresent, multifaceted discussion, the internet has instead made sectarianism an almost default position. The nature of mass debate has become solely binary. You're on one side or the other. And if you factor that in with whatever combination of debates you've been forced to take sides on, the number of people willing to listen to you because they agree with you shrinks daily. Try stating a strong opinion on gun control on Twitter, for example, and see how many followers you lose. That's not the only example. This polemic, and all of the polemics, are going on the Guardian website. And that no one really wants to say so out loud. Most of us seem to accept these days, I don't want to speak with you, I'll just say my opinion. I accept these days that the comments on the Guardian on articles like this, while occasionally contain interesting replies, are far more often the domain of outraged point missers, incandescently furious pedants, and trolls who don't bother reading past the subheadline. But again, did I pause about whether to include that paragraph, knowing that this article will have comments beneath it? I did. More importantly, have I, by all that frankly liberating name-calling, just committed the same crime myself by dismissing any discussion I find unpalatable? Because this is the kind of risk you run by saying something like that opinion about abortion. We would almost certainly argue for your right to hold it. But in this sectarian, connected world, we'd then maybe stop listening to you. In a way, you'd suddenly be free of censorship because you'd be able to say whatever you like. You'd just be saying it to fewer and fewer people. And importantly, you'd be left out of conversations you'd like to be having. Can an artist do this? Should an artist? Certainly there are artists who are happy to talk to their own small sect in exchange for complete freedom to say whatever they will, but isn't the pushing of an artist into a small sect also a kind of censorship? And if chosen by the artist, isn't it a kind of self-exile, of giving up on engaging, of possibly even changing things because you're no longer part of a discussion that might? For example, if you're a writer who wants to affect the world and engage with a large audience, would you risk being marginalized in America by talking about your atheism? Would you risk the same marginalization in England by talking about your devout Christianity? Would you loudly proclaim a pro-Israel position in Europe, or a pro-Palestinian one in the US, or go anywhere else in the world and suggest Israel and Palestine may both have dirty hands? Now, of course, there's a natural elision between what we say in private versus what we say in public. But in a time where everything you say is now said to the entire world, are there areas where you've allowed that elision to justify not speaking what you see as the truth to save yourself from the consequences that could result? How does an artist speak freely in this environment? I don't have a simple credo that answers this. I press on, I try hard, I work to say what I want to say in a way that keeps my voice both heard, but also truthful, also standing up for what I believe in the most effective way I can. But I don't always get it right. I don't always make myself proud. And most importantly, I find that the struggle grows daily in the way the world now connects. And so I ask you today, what do you not say? What do you censor when you write? Because I'm afraid I can't believe that you don't. You may be willing to do some of the things I've mentioned today, but all, that's a question, but all. I like to think of myself as a fearless writer, and I'm sure all of you do too, but are we really challenging ourselves enough to keep that true? I don't think the question behind censorship today is any longer should you be able to say these things, nor is it even a question so much anymore of if you can, certainly not in the Western world. I think the question has become if you do. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick, for that polemic. And when you were talking about self-censorship, it sort of threw me back to my childhood. I grew up in a very conservative Catholic home, and we couldn't use words like sex and love and some other words. And I remember being young, and one of my favorite songs was Salt and Pepper's Let's Talk About Sex, Baby. But to be able to sing it, I'd have to replace sex with bread. So I'd sing, let's talk about bread, baby. Let's talk about, you and me. And so, I mean, so even up until now, I find it very difficult to use certain words. I find it very difficult to swear, for example. And when I was writing a character who swears a lot, it took me a lot of courage to write her, but it took me a much longer time to be able to read extracts, in public. I had to really practice on my own in front of the mirror. There was no earthquake, nothing happened, and then I could go out and, and say it. So the self-censorship thing I find very, very interesting, and I imagine that as YA and children's writer in particular, that you face questions on the material of your works and how to present that material, far more than writers who write for adults do, for example. And no, last month you were talking with GP Taylor,
I was.
or you responded to him.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I read something online. Yeah, and GP Taylor declared that children's literature has become too frightening, and should be marked with an age certification system. And he announced that he planned to withdraw from the direction he'd taken, and he wasn't going to write any more of the Vampire Labyrinth series, right? Because people who were reading it and reviewing it said it was too frightening for children. And he said, and I quote, "I have changed my mind. I think children's literature has gone too far." So do you believe that children's literature, or any literature really, can never go, too far? Where do you draw the line? Why? And does the market have any influence on your decision?
Well, I think if GP Taylor did withdraw from writing, we should all be so lucky. But it's been interesting. The past 2 days have been really, really interesting, because I've sometimes felt quite distant from the discussion, because there's been a lot of discussion about the novel as art form, obviously the novel as a personal expression, and that is how I describe how I write books. I always say I write them for myself. When I'm writing for teenagers, I always say I'm writing for the teenager in myself, and I do believe that. But there has been less talk about writing as an act of communication, of engagement, and I also write for that reason. And when I spoke on Friday, I said the same thing, that YA writers, we must engage. We must. And sure, there are conditions that come with that. There are malleable conditions, and there are conditions that can be subverted, they can be ignored even, but they need to be considered. And I really like what Alan Bissett said on yesterday, using the word negotiation about writing, that a lot of writing is a negotiation. How can I say this? My publishers have never censored me. I did have a talk with them, and they put it in terms like, well, if you include a lot of profanity, perhaps it might not be put in a Year 7 library. Now, you can ask yourself whether that is a question of censorship or not. I viewed it as a challenge. I viewed it as, well, I would like Year 7 to read my book, so how can I creatively solve that dilemma while keeping everything I want in the story? And I don't mind that negotiation. I don't mind that engagement with my audience. I don't mind going to them and making it approachable, saying, come on, I'm going to tell you a story. Let's go together. And I don't think, it's clearly slightly different for adult writing, but I write both. And I don't think it's entirely absent from writing for adults. I don't think the question of what you choose and how you choose to engage, either in your books or what you say outside of your books, is something that can be avoided. I mean, Kamala said a fascinating thing yesterday about the 2 languages of writing in Pakistan, and you choose one, and then that almost excludes you from being read in the other, and so the decision has to be made, and so she chose to write in English, and that's an engagement decision with the audience. It's also, I mean, you are making a statement about it, and that is a choice that has to be made. It's not a free thing that can be done. It has to be decided. It has to be engaged upon. And about what you say outside of your writing is, Irvine Welsh gave the polemic yesterday, and it was about 25 minutes long, and there was a lot of stuff in it. I didn't follow all of it, but there's a lot of stuff in it about globalization, about internationalism, about writing a specifically local book that then went universal. Really, really, really fascinating stuff. And the headline in today's Guardian was Irvine Welsh slams Booker Prize. So you kind of think, well, why bother getting out of bed, And I looked at that, and then I looked at my speech, and I thought, are there things in here that will be taken out of context and be written about, and have the rest of my point ignored? And that's irritating.
Probably you slammed that sex award.
Oh well, I'm very happy to do that. But that didn't used to be. That didn't used to be, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that it is. I mean, that we have to fight for our place in the world, that we have to fight to period. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but for me, that is a question of wanting to engage. I find it hard to, like I said on Friday, I find it hard to accept that the novel that says something to no one is somehow more effective than the novel that says nothing to millions. I think that there's the area in between that we all negotiate and all work with, and that comes with good bits, but it comes with challenges, and it comes with being conscious of what we say and how we say it so that we can keep on saying it. And I think it gets harder, and I think it gets trickier, and I think it is only going to get even harder and even trickier.
Thank you. I'd like to open up the debate to the audience, and the writers as well. I don't know.
You gotta pick. Should we go to Teresa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to point.
Okay. You didn't
My
though.
name is Teresa. Stand up. Sorry. My name is Teresa Breslin, and I write because essentially, that's what I do. That's wonderful, Patrick. I just wondered if you would like to talk, or the audience would like to talk about what happens to your book afterwards, because just from personal experience, I wrote a book which concerned the Inquisition. So it wasn't a book about torture, it was a book about belief and how powerful and dangerous that can be. But my books are translated into lots of languages, and this one in particular, when it was translated, was put on the adult list, not as a crossover book, but on the adult list. So in a way, that was after, it was kind of out of my control. And another book that I had a huge problem with was about sectarianism and asylum seekers in Glasgow, so it was specifically for that audience. And it was a head of English in a Glasgow school, didn't want it in the school. Now, interestingly, just to pick up on the debate yesterday, when it was on shortlists, it was actually the majority of shortlists it was on were in England. So it's what happens, then you have negotiated and perhaps you've taken advice from the editor. And the big threat that wasn't the year 7 for me, it was your book will never get on a book fair. Yeah. Whether you want your book on a book fair, I don't know, but so afterwards, when people have the story, and the kind of, especially with young adults and children, where the gatekeepers, and the concept of the age guidance, or yes or not.
Yeah. Okay.
But I wonder if there's any, maybe a young adult writer in the, who would like to
Keith,
maybe,
Oh, sorry, Keith was first.
What's his name?
Keith.
Okay.
Hello, yes, so my name's Keith Gray. I'm a writer based here in Edinburgh. And talking about self-censorship and writing for children, I wonder if maybe self-censorship could be seen as a skill that perhaps good children's writers, good young adult writers develop or nurture. So Teresa's just mentioned the gatekeepers, and I think a lot of children's authors actually bemoan the gatekeepers, that when we as young adult writers, we write a book, it doesn't immediately get straight into the hands of our readers. It has to go, the gatekeepers, if we've got the editors and publishers to keep on our side. And then we hit the librarians. It's a truism, if there's less libraries, there's going to be less young people reading. If there's less young people reading, there's going to be less older people reading, which is maybe a point about tomorrow about the future of books. We need the libraries. But my point is, we've got to please or keep on side the editors, the publishers, then the librarians, perhaps the teachers, and then as a young adult writer, of course, we've got to please or keep on side or keep happy the parents. Because if any one of that chain gets offended or takes umbrage with something I write in my book does not hit the target audience. My book does not hit the person I've been writing for. My first book was published in '96, and so I've seen a lot of changes, and things are a lot more open-minded nowadays than they were 16 years ago. Parents don't seem any more open-minded. Who's going to kill off children's writing in this country? Overprotective parents, I think, or Michael Gove, one or the other. But I suppose my point is, I'm just wondering, I don't know the answer, I'm just wondering, could we judge self-censorship among young adults, the best writers for teenagers, children, young adults, the most successful writers of these brilliant books? Maybe they can tell their story without losing any of the power, without losing any of the potency or any of the integrity of their word, of what they want to say. But they've navigated these gatekeepers correctly. And they've not patronised the audience, of course. That's the big thing. I know many fantastic books that have been barred from the audience somewhere along that chain of gatekeepers. Unfortunately, somebody either covertly or overtly has blocked that book, or even books that have been written that lose their way because the kids just think it's weak and it's patronising. So perhaps for a young people's writer, a skill or a talent of self-censorship could be thought of as another tool in our box, another weapon in our armoury to get towards our target audience.
I think so. Should we try the guy in the front, actually?
Yeah.
Yes. And we'll come back to Melvin. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Big boss.
My name is Timothy Bassi. I'm an Italian teacher. And I would like to mention a case of censorship in Italy today, well, in 2009. When writer José Saramago tried to publish his diary in Italy in 2009 with the publishing company Einaudi. The publishing company Einaudi had published many works of José Saramago. It's the prestigious Italian publishing company. Well, this company is owned by Berlusconi's family, and also Mondadori's company. So they refused to publish José Saramago's book because it contained some offenses to Silvio Berlusconi. José Saramago strongly criticized Berlusconi's politics and also Berlusconi as a person. So yeah, they refused to publish him. And well, José Saramago is one of my favorite writers. I totally agree with what he said. But my question is, can José Saramago or any writer write anything about anyone? Are there limits to what a writer can write? Thank you.
Anybody want to
Would
answer
the
that?
writers want to?
Anybody want to answer that?
Because I suppose this question is the opposite of censorship. Is that, you know, total
freedom.
absolute freedom? Yeah, the lady.
Kirsty.
Yeah, please.
Kirsty Garland, writer. I've threeped, that's a lovely Scots word, endlessly in this conference about the difference between, you know, the work of art and the novel existing in the marketplace. And I think it was a wonderful address, and I loved it. There's so much to think about. But all the time, I'm thinking these are issues that pertain to someone who has his eye on the market. There are others who make a piece of work and have had work be lost to the market because of letting the work stand as it is. I think your point about where that goes in terms of taking it to a place of exile is a profound and important one to consider. But I do want to keep those two categories distinct. The thing that is to be sold, where the gatekeeper has power, and the thing that sits autonomously on the page and may end up nowhere at all.
I reject that as a false division. I reject that as that's the only two options. I mean, and I also reject the pejorative that I have an ear to the market because I have an ear to my reader. I don't think that's the same thing. I'm not writing to make a lot of money, although I happen to make a lot of money. No, I'm kidding. I'm writing because I want to share something, and there's a consideration. I'm sorry. I know this isn't about the audience and me. I know that, but I don't think that is the only dichotomy. I don't think it is only market or exile. I think there has got to be a middle ground, and I think the middle ground is where we all work. I'm sorry. I'll stop interrupting. But yes.
Yeah, but don't you think that as yeah.
Say again?
Some of us are not in that middle ground. Some of us are not really. We are not in that middle ground. Our sales figures show it.
But it's a point accepted. But I'm not saying that also that is automatically the sort of brilliant mountaintop that is the ultimate respected thing. I don't think either is one better than the other.
Oh, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm just making a case for two discrete activities. And yes, there are ways in which they come together sometimes, which is wonderful and exciting, and and wonderful to achieve a great audience for something that's been made on the mountaintop. But they begin from different places.
I disagree. Wasn't giving it there. So you wanted argument, you did. So.
Ivan? Yeah, yes, please.
China Mieville, London. I wanted to try and address this question about, is there nothing that we shouldn't say? There are millions and millions of things we shouldn't say. Of course there are. We all self-censor all the time, and a bloody good thing too. Our minds are washing machines full of crap that we pick up over our years on this earth, an earth that is full of crap and prejudices and nonsense all the time. And one of the fundamental problems of this argument is the illusion between having the legal right to say something, and I don't trust the state, I don't want the state to have the power to tell me what I can and can't say, and having the moral right not to be told off for saying something objectionable. And this is why the free speech warrior who thinks they get to say whatever they want and then complain if someone complains, that's not censorship. Censorship is when the police come round and say, don't say that. Turning around to someone and saying, that is thoroughly fucking objectionable, is part of civilization. It's part of being civilized people. This is a quote from Enid Blyton's daughter. My sister and I came to the conclusion in the 1980s that because of the multicultural society we now had, the gollies, the gollywogs, should disappear disappear from the books. We felt that it was not right in this day and age to use them if they were considered to be a parody of part of our population. How incredibly polite and sensitive and decent. None of this stuff disappears from history. Archivists are always going to be able to find it. This is not about, you know, the commissar vanishes or some kind of Stalinist work of airbrushing these things out of history. It's about saying that context matters, and we should self-censor all the time. There is a massive libidinal investment among people who have reactionary opinions that they know because society is getting a clue in presenting themselves as incredibly brave. So you will never just hear someone say, I hate Muslims. They will always say, I know I'm not supposed to say this. Yeah. I know that actually, you know, the politically correct brigade are going to knock down my door and throw me in a dungeon, but actually I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Islam's a real problem. As if that's not the default conversation in every pub in the world, you know, in Britain, I mean. This you know, the quotidian prejudices of Boers becoming like a sign of their kind of amazing freedom. 2 streets down in Castle Street, there is a shop. A shop called Treasure Trove, in the main window of which is a gollywog. Right there, right now. Now, I don't want the police to go down and close that shop. I want the people who run that shop to realise that this is spitting in the face of a lot of people who walk past it and have the decency and the civilization to stop doing so.
I'd like us to stay with the point China's made. Is it a follow-up?
Would anyone like to follow up?
Would you like to follow up on what China said? Yes.
Just one small piece of information. There is actually a shop on the High Street, on the Royal Mile, that had in the window a little black sample, and the police did go in.
Okay.
Do you approve? Do you approve of the police intervention?
Oh, the police went into
but
the
do
shop.
you approve of that?
Approve of it?
Sorry?
Do you approve of it? Yeah.
I think the person should have been invited to reconsider. Yeah.
To be honest,
John wanted to say something.
Hold on, wait, Margaret.
I organized a conference 50 years ago, and then censorship was about everyday life, what could be described in the novel. And a great many things that people did could not be described. Today, it is about culture, based either on religion or on repressive regimes that do not want information to get out. Where is the writer today? Because a writer has to have great courage today. They risk their lives if they write about certain subjects. For instance, honor killing gets into the press. People get killed by their parents because they have wanted to move out of that culture and into a more tolerant culture. There are regimes around the world, many of whom sent people to the Olympic Games recently, extremely ugly regimes where censorship is a matter of just not daring to in any way oppose the culture. The culture that imposes censorship today is either based on authoritarian regimes or else upon intolerant religion. I think that what we are looking for today are novelists to have the courage to come out and look into and examine and describe what goes on inside those cultures, because that is the only way that things are going to change.
Thank you. And I mean, of course, in some places, I mean, writers have got to be much more courageous to be writers than in other places. Right?
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You can.
I think we do have writers who. Kamila Shamsi, Pakistan.
Yes.
Of course, we have writers who look into all these things. And Elif Shafak, who was speaking yesterday, has a book called Honor, which is on honor killing. Nadeem Aslam has written the most fantastic book, Maps for Lost Lovers, about a Muslim community in the north of England and honor killings and all kinds of things. It should also be said that there are a lot of writers who write these things and are told by other people that they're going to have fatwas against them. Yeah. Tom Holland was here earlier in the festival. He's written a book called The Shadow of the Sword, which is about the origins of Islam and contesting what those origins were. And Tom recently said that he's had lots of conversations about this book with Muslims. He says no one's ever mentioned the F word, which is the fatwa, except a whole number of non-Muslim reviewers who in all their reviews kept saying that he's going to get a fatwa for this. So I think we also need, to not go a little bit too crazy. These conversations are happening. These books are being written. If you don't know that these books are being written, maybe that's the problem as well.
Okay, I think we'll go online.
I'll use this one.
Yes.
On that point, there's plenty coming through online on a whole range of topics, and they want you to get stuck into how we can use technology and the tweeters question as well. But on that point, there's a question about what about countries like Turkey where writers do get prosecuted for their ideas? How do we get their stories out? Practicalities, how do we approach that? If anyone wants to take that?
I think Juno. Oh, that's not it. Okay. Anybody like to take that? Writers from China, for example? Yes?
My name is Xichuan. I'm from China, and I live in Beijing. So it seems that it's a duty for me to say a few words about censorship. And also, I would like to say it's really a cliche for me to talk about censorship.
Yeah.
Because it's I think that it's censorship is of course I myself is against censorship, but I feel that I'm sophisticated enough to say that it's unavoidable anywhere and any time, censorship, because wherever or whenever you have taboos, historical taboos, religious taboos, social or political taboos, then there is censorship. So I think censorship is there all the time, and maybe it's not here in Scotland or in England, but in China, because I live in China, and I feel there's the air, the whole air is there every day. My daily air is something with censorship, But the Chinese situation is much more complicated than censorship. Recently, a writer, a scholar actually, published a book on Chinese social thoughts. He named 8 thoughts. 8 thoughts, that's Mao Zedong thoughts, Deng Xiaoping thoughts for market economy, and liberalism. Liberalism, maybe it's out of your imagination. Liberalism is very, very powerful and influential in China. They get their inspirations from England, British, American philosophers. And some English philosophers, British philosophers are very popular, very well known in China. And they have been not an enemy, but what's that word? Revival or something? The opposite side is new left. New lefts. They got their inspirations from French and German philosophers. And beside these people, there's populism there. There's new Confucianism there. And what else? Nihilism there, consumerism there. So it's very complicated. And here it seems to me that the Western world only concerns about one thing, that is, if a person who believes in liberalism is persecuted. But for the Chinese, with my daily life in Beijing, I feel it's much, much more complicated in China. And this is one thing. The other thing is that China, everybody knows that China is a country with censorship, but maybe, I don't know if you know that actually we don't have a law of censorship. So it's up to the editors or up to the supervisors to decide whether a book or a film needs to be censored. So it depends. It's very Kafka-like. It's a Kafkan story. It's a Kafkan story that is if you for instance, if an editor feels uncertain or unsure whether a book could be published, then usually he will hand it in to the junior editor. And the junior editor will hand it into maybe to some leaders from the Ministry of what's that? Ministry of Administration of Publishing and Newspapers, something. And usually if you do that, they will feel that there must be something wrong there. So if you do that, then usually you get the answer is no, you can't publish this book. But if you are brave enough to publish this book, maybe nobody cares. And some years ago, when the government feels they don't like a book, then they will stop the circulation, and they will have some criticizing essays or articles about this book. Usually, if you criticize the book, then the book will cause a sensation, and people will go to pirate editions. And now I think those people are getting more wiser. They're wiser. They're more clever. That is, if they are not satisfied with the book, they will just keep silent. So you will die by yourself. Nobody cares about you. And of course, so it's like a big game. In China, it's like a big game. You can make use of censorship. You can make use of censorship to be famous, to be influential. And well, this is a part of the...
We're not censoring anybody for time.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, but carry on, finish your point. There are a lot of people, yeah. No, finish, go ahead, finish. No, finish, make your point. Yeah, no, sorry.
I'll stop whenever you stop me.
Oh dear.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
You're clearly, yeah.
I would like to say is self-censorship. Self-censorship is,
I think he's right.
what Patrick mentioned. This is really important. And self-censorship for the editors. If you are censored by other people's censorship, if you are censored by other people's self-censorship, then there is no censorship. It's such a Kafkan story. And so I think it's and also just now Chika mentioned that 5 websites were censored. Something, I overheard that. But you know, now the People's Daily. This is the party's throat newspaper. The circulation of People's Daily is 3 million. 3 million circulation. The 3 million copies. But there's a Chinese movie star, a girl. His not website. We don't have Twitters in China. We have Weibo, that is Chinese Twitter. It's called Weibo. And this movie star, she has 17 million followers or readers. So the People's Daily, this newspaper, is very nervous that the circulation of this newspaper is much lesser than the movie star's voice, the followers. So they started another Weibo People's Daily. So People's Daily in paper and People's Daily in Weibo. And if you go to China, you will find that People's Daily express one voice, and People's Daily in Weibo, that's another very intellectual site. It's very complicated. And my last sentence is that to be a writer in China, I believe in a sentence given once by a Polish thinker and activist. His name is Adam Michnik. He said that to live an as-if life. As if. So there is censorship. Let's live as if there's no censorship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chika.
Thank you. Juno. Can you please take the mic to Juno? He's been raising his hand.
Thank you. It was a wonderful intervention, Patrick, in the conversation. It's as well interested in the way that what happens with censorship that doesn't even involve too much people's choices. We have, especially because we have a group of writers here, And many of them will do readings in the United States. And some of those people doing reading in the United States will actually end up in Arizona. And I think one of the things that doesn't get discussed enough, I think, at an international level, and is certainly, I don't even think, discussed enough at the national level, is what's been happening in the United States. That one of the things that's occurred in the past year, and it's worth reflecting on, especially for writers who are going to somehow be engaged in some kind of event or some kind of reading in Arizona, is that Arizona basically passed a law just recently that bans Latino studies literature, which means that books written by Latinos, irregardless if the topic has anything to do with Latinos, are banned from the public school system, because they claim that the books are divisive, and they claim that the books are somehow that the books themselves are creating a racist climate. And this is something that has occurred and has flown under the radar of a lot of writers and a lot of readers. And in fact, it's something that I think is really worth reflecting upon, because a lot of these writers, in many ways, weren't considering themselves even writing things that they would consider somehow problematic. Even the question of, am I censoring myself or am I not? It literally just had to do that you happen to be from this background, and if a teacher thought that your book would be representative or useful. And I think that what would be good, especially for organizations like this, is to think about what we can do as an organization to even comment on that. And even writers, how are we going to engage when they send us to do a reading in Arizona? How many people are doing readings in Arizona and don't know that the majority of the population of the state is Latino, and the kids are being denied these sort of books? And one of the things that's really been hopeful for me has been the reactions from readers more than writers. I mean, I have a lot of connections with American writers, and you would be amazed how few American writers have actually said anything or have signed any documents about this. I mean, an entire state, the light has gone out. And a lot of writers, they're going around their day, they're going and doing readings in the state, they don't comment on it. But the reaction of readers has been incredibly heartening. And I think that's one of the things that I think we have to remember, that often readers' responses and readers' community work leads to a lot of positive work. And you have this remarkable ground roots movement of readers doing this thing that they call libro traficante, which is they become book smugglers. And they're smuggling books into the state. And it's really a wonderful thing, and I definitely think that it's something that we should look into, especially those of us who have the kind of lives and the kind of careers where you're going to spend any time in the United States. This is an issue that people aren't really talking about, because even though the Latino community is the largest quote-unquote minority community in the United States, it's almost as if the community doesn't exist. I've read so many novels by people who write about America, and not a Latino appears. They actively sort of erase this large kind of community. And I think that this is stuff that's well worth doing. And certainly I just was going to finish up, because there's a lot of people here who are going to have conferences or going to go to other events. I think we should mimic some of the work that's done in other sort of organizations, where we sort of pick a writer who is being silenced. We pick a writer who is being banned, and sort of make an empty seat for them in our conference, so that this is not a forgotten thing. I think that by leaving an empty seat or sort of having a reading for a writer like that, I think it would be very important, because in Latin America, what we see is the amount of writers who are killed because they're doing work trying to report on, say, the drug trafficking. They're doing reports they're doing books trying to talk about the impunity of the military class. And I think this is something that we can do easily and could be duplicated in all the conferences, especially people who are going on to Toronto. I think that we should kind of get that Amnesty International thing going, because it's not a bad reminder that amongst us, there's also a lot of absences, people who were on the front lines and who made our conversations possible. And in fact, continue to make our conversations possible. I always think the people who get to go to the events are the beneficiaries of work of people who are never around. So I guess those are the two kind of interventions I want to make, and you were all very patient. Thank you.
Just to say, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I think the festival does do, are they amnesty readings or are they pen readings? Amnesty readings, yeah. Oh, hold on, the microphone.
No, okay.
Wait, to the microphone.
I'm the Vice President of Scottish Pens, the
online.
Scottish Centre of Pen International, and we have an empty chair. We had it specially created by art students at a school in Scotland, and we take it around festivals. It has on the work, on the material, it has the names and drawings of people who have been imprisoned and indeed killed because of their writings. We had it at our event yesterday here, and it also appears at Amnesty imprisoned writers events. And as I said, we take it everywhere to remind people, no one sits in it, but it's to remind people that that is there because of people who cannot come because they're imprisoned, who cannot come because they've been killed.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think Ben.
And then there's another audience.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Fascinating polemic. I wanted to say all sorts of things about censorship and humor, and elaborate on self-censorship, but I'm gonna ditch all that because I think we should take Juno up. Juno has raised something that is very important, and it is I'm astonished to actually have heard what he just said. And I want to propose that the writers here at this meeting now, that we send a general statement to the state of Arizona. I think we should do something here. We can talk, but a point comes when we make a stand. I think I like to put this to the chair, that we make some kind of noise, some kind of major movement to respond to what Juno said. I think it is outrageous, it's unacceptable, and
I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Now, an intervention online. Thank you very much, Ben. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And yeah, we should definitely. Yes, definitely. Yes, I do totally agree.
I'll happily put myself forward to be part of the committee that would write this.
Definitely.
All for Ben?
Yes.
We have extra information coming in from our virtual delegate, Harry Kunju. So for anyone online, he's posted some additional information about the law and its particulars online for those watching. And he also adds that, that the reasons that writers self-censor are to do with fear that the market won't sell, fear of peer pressure, and fear of violence. So, but mainly a thank you there for Juno for bringing that subject up.
Okay, thank you. I think Nick has been raising his hand.
Yes,
Hi, I'm Nick Laird. I'm from Northern Ireland, a poet and a novelist, and also a lawyer or an ex-lawyer. And that was great, Patrick. I was slightly worried about the way you dismissed the libel laws and I think you mentioned the secret courts.
Yeah.
And super injunctions, because actually it is different from 1962. We have to not lose sight of the fact that the level of censorship is changing. It's not that we're not knowing things anymore, but we don't know that we don't know them. Not to go to Donald Rumsfeld about it, but like in that justice that you mentioned, the Secret Courts Act, that was just discussed last week in Parliament, and what came out was that not just will we not know that there's a hearing going, what's happening in the hearing, we won't know the existence of the hearing. And if that was law now, we wouldn't know stuff like the last Labour government had a secret policy on torture. We wouldn't know about British people being deposed to Guantanamo. We wouldn't know about the torture of Bin Mohammed. So it's sort of important not to lose sight of that. And if you're speaking as a writer about it, you lose your content because you can only censor what you know. And if you don't even know that stuff, then you're in serious trouble. So I just wanted to say that quickly. The other thing is, you know, we can stand here and talk about Turkey and about China and about Arizona and stuff, and we can send a very well-intentioned letter and all the rest of it, but we should also watch what is going on in our own backyards before we start doing that, because this government, every time they have a chance to, they do seem to introduce legislation that takes away centuries of legal precedent. Anyway, that's it, sorry.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Nick.
I'd just like to say that if you do decide as writers that you want to make a statement, then obviously the conference organisers will prepare a statement immediately afterwards for you all to
lovely.
send.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm doing it. Sorry.
4 eyes better than 2.
Okay. All right, I'm Vivek Santayana, I'm a student, and my question follows on from what Juno and Sichuan had said, that It's not, we have to have this dialogue existing, and it's a dialogue not just of writers who make a statement, but also of a conscientious readership that takes cognizance of these issues of censorship and self-censorship and other such problems which we face in bringing stories out. Now, my question is that shouldn't readers themselves gradually develop their own conscience and judgment when it comes to these issues? For instance, when we see headlines of Irwin Welsh's talk termed as him bashing the Booker Prize, which is a complete non sequitur to the theme of the talk on the brochure itself. The readership themselves would be aware that there are certain issues where these individuals are being misquoted, and they will also neglect the various trollers on Twitter who argue baselessly and make such slanderous statements with no factual or knowledgeable backing. So isn't it true that today a readership can sift through this information, or a readership that matters, the core individuals who have political opinion or say or capital, who matter, whose influence matters in these opinions, would be able to sift through all the rubbish out there and really get to the heart of the matter?
You want to check it out?
Yeah.
Melvin's been trying since the very beginning.
Joseph Manu. Okay, sorry.
He's been asking from the beginning. Go ahead.
Is it me?
No, yeah, go on. Yeah, it's fine. Then but you could have gone on and handed it on to Joseph. That's fine.
I'm Manu Joseph. I'm from India. People here call me Manu, which I think is a football club. I don't mind that, actually. I'm a novelist, but I'm also a journalist who has lived all his life in India. And occasionally I'm asked by foreign publications, including British newspapers, to write for them. And what is interesting is that while Britain obviously is a very liberal society, there is a lot of tolerance to British views about Britain, obviously. But when an Indian, a hardcore Indian, and a professional journalist attempts to use some adjectives, let's say to describe the Olympics or the Queen, actually, I quite like her actually. There is a very subtle form of censorship, which is at the news desk, which is a request. Can the word catastrophe be replaced by a mishap? Let's say. Censorship is just not about the state coming to your doorsteps. It is just like racism sometimes. It's more subtle. It's about losing friends, losing a commissioning editor, and stuff like that. I would also like to come back to the topic of self-censorship, actually. Last 2 or 3 days, we have been talking about the novel as a very noble thing and writing as a very noble profession, which I'm sure it is. But at the heart of the novel is, I feel, a deception. There is a technical problem. I think that is the fundamental flaw of the novel, which is that, in a way, you also have to deceive the reader. Your characters, for instance, have to be likable. Human beings are not like that. It is a technical requirement of the novel. You could be a brilliant writer, but if your protagonist is not a likable person, you will fail. Which is the point, actually. One motive of most of the writers is some kind of a material success. It need not be commercial success. Glory is also part of a material success. So there is a corruption at the heart of the novel, and that's where I feel self-censorship is very dangerous. And I can give an example. I don't mean to bring gender into this, but it's very interesting. As a reader, when I read some male writers who are supposed to be very crazy and very honest, I still find their characterization very naive, and their portrayal of female characters very different from how they talk about things in private. There is a lot of political correctness, because as a writer today, you cannot survive without political correctness. While the fact is that there is an aspect of the male mind which is socially unacceptable even to men. But novels these days tend to be somewhat naive when it comes to these things. It might be good in a way, but I'm just pointing out the fact that there is something naive about the novel, and self-censorship is something which makes it naive. And also, just one more point about courage about writing. I don't think courage is about writing anything you want. Courage is accepting the option of failure and not ever seeing success because of what you write.
Thank you. So just a quick follow-up to what the student said about readers being able to, sift the chaff from the wheat. And I think before the book gets to the readers, some sort of censorship, to some certain extent has already gone on. So what the reader sees is what has already passed through, several hands. So the reader can only read what's been allowed in that market space. I just wanted to sort of make that comment. Yes, please.
The question our friend asked there about how you negotiate yourself in order to try and find out what's really going on.
Who are you?
Name.
Someone's asking for it.
I do beg your pardon. Melvin Burgess. I'm from England, and like Patrick, I write young adult fiction. So this idea of how you negotiate your way, it is actually a very hard thing to do. Now, perhaps slightly unlike Patrick, I kind of made my career out of kind of not negotiating, and I made my career about pushing the boundaries and so forth, and trying to shine a light into dark places, something which is actually probably no longer necessary, fortunately, in YA fiction, certainly not to the extent that it was. And I had a couple of books, which attracted a great deal of probobium or something like that in the press. A book called Junk, a book called Doing It, another one called Lady My Life as a Bitch. And there was a huge fuss about these books. And there was a kind of national debate, really, which was trying to say, well, how do you deal with young people? Do you inform and empower them, or do you protect them and try and keep information from them so they grow up straight and true, and then they walk out into the world? This was presented in the press as being a debate. Now, 2 points I'd like to illustrate that actually this was a complete paper tiger. It was not a genuine current debate in the country, which you would not have believed, judging by the amount of fuss that was made in the press. 2 points. First of all, I never had one letter of complaint. Not one. And if you'd have seen the amount of fuss that was going on in the press, you'd find that difficult to believe. Never had one. The other point is this. From time to time, I found myself in TV or radio studios arguing my point. And you would imagine that if this was a live debate, and if this was a serious debate, I would have come across very serious people from, say, drug organisations or, people dealing with young people, funded organisations. They never were. They were always people from bonkers organisations, people who were unfunded and who had really no say. And what would happen, of course, is that the editors in this country, who like to have a ding-dong in the studio, that's how they like it, they would take me, they would see something barking in the Daily Mail about it, they would say, right, there's a story there. They would go around anyone sensible, and they would discover that actually what I was saying was fairly mainstream, and so they'd invite someone mad along to have a discussion. I'm paraphrasing. I know, of course, there were plenty of people who disagreed with it, but as an actual genuine debate in the country about how do you deal with young people, that argument was long gone and dead before I ever said a thing. But it was presented as a live debate. And it's an example of how the press defines how we understand things, how we argue things, and how we perceive things. And to this extent, certainly in that case, and in many other cases, it's way behind the actual debates which are happening live on the ground with the people who are dealing with it.
There's some audience in the back as well.
Who?
No, go to you.
Who did? Yeah, to you, please.
There's some people up there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
She told me to look for her. She did. Yes, go ahead.
Yuli from China, live in America. I want to follow up that because there are press in the audience. I would like to hear I would like to hear someone who has been in the position to censor, to say something, because just to offer that I have certainly been censored, in China and elsewhere, but I have also been in a position that I have to censor someone, which give me very interesting thoughts. This was my first teaching experience. I had a young woman in my class announcing herself as a white supremacist. Well, she had great trouble with me being her teacher. She had great trouble with students of color in my class. And do I censor her? Every time she raised her hand, do I just say, I don't want to pick you. I don't want you to talk. That's a position I was very conscious. She's in my class. I have to give her, to be civilized, I have to give her a position. And then I talked to my friends, and my friend said, "Oh, let me just come and beat her up and shut up." And I wish I could do that, but certainly, I'm a very gentle person. I've never beaten up a child in my life, but I think it's the position. You know, we always say, "Oh, the press did this." I mean, I would like if we can find someone in the audience who is from, you know, who has been in this position that they have to make these decisions and how they think. Thank you.
There was a lady raising her.
Charlotte actually wrote that article. I do apologize for singing you out. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, Charlotte Higgins from The Guardian. I speak tentatively. I feel embarrassed that I'm speaking, but since there was a plea for a Guardian or a journalist, I thought I would. So I did want to speak a little bit to what you had said, Patrick, about the Guardian piece today, with that headline about Irvine Welsh. And I am kind of horrified by it in a way, but you talked about wanting people to read beyond the subheading of your piece that you write for The Guardian, and I would make a similar plea back to you and suggest that clearly, just as you're writing within an ideology, a system, a publishing system, so am I, so are my colleagues. And alas, part of that is what constitutes a news story. And what is seen as constituting a news story is stuff that people have heard of, prizes and rows, and that, you know, I have to internalise that, and I have to deal with it, and I have to negotiate with that. And 3 paragraphs of Irvine Welsh is the kind of ritual sacrifice I made in order to, I hope, represent some views of really real proper interest by China and by Chi Chuan and other people who spoke really well. So, yes, we're constantly negotiating. You know, we work within a very structured system, and we have to do our best. There's very little else to say unless another journalist wants to say something more sensible.
Are you a journalist as well? That's the lady in white there.
Full disclosure, I also, well, up till now, I wrote for The Guardian. But,
So this is another Guardian intervention, which is responding to Melvin, to say that I was the editor who started off the rompers about your novels by publishing a fellow children's author's views about it. So I gave her the right to say what she wanted to say. I didn't agree with her necessarily, but I gave her the right. It wasn't generated by me. She came to me asking me to run it.
Okay. Yeah, maybe on something else. On anybody wants to pick up on Ye Yun Lee's?
Respond. We've been asked to. We've been asked to try to get responses.
Sorry.
We've been asked to do that. So.
Yes. You're talking about Anne Fine and doing it, and at that point I would completely accept. No editor of any newspaper would have turned down Anne Fine having a half-page rant about my book. And, you know, in the case of doing it, I was kind of grateful, you know, because it did probably help the sales very much. But nevertheless, I still think that my point overall holds, because that was not the only case. And there were some serious, there was serious stuff in the press. There was even occasionally serious stuff on the TV. But by and large, I don't think that those odd exceptions hold my point. But by and large, it is true that I mean, that debate was another case in point. You know, the idea of that book was to try and to allow young men be a little more at home with their sexuality. I just wonder if I can sort of slightly expand on and go back to what Patrick was saying about self-censorship. And you know, one of the things I think which perhaps slightly differs between young adult writers and the adult world is that we're perhaps a little less anxious about having a utility to what we do. There's been a great deal that I've heard here about, you know, I only write for myself. Writers always say this, and I never believe them. And, you know, I only do it for me, and I dip my hand into myself, and here's my heart, and I sort of fling it at you. But whereas, you know, we are aware that we're doing it for a purpose. Now, you know, is it educational? Is it to explore something? Well, obviously not. Is it for to try and engage people? Is it just to make a lot of money? But I do feel that, you know, if you are talking about self-censorship, the question which inevitably comes up are, well, what do I want to say? And why do I want to say it? And that's surely is the key point. That until you are understanding about your message, or your purpose, or your role in more than just literature, but in society, then you can't really define what you need to say. And I think that that's at the heart of it, and that self-censorship which you talk about comes out from not being clear, as a writer, what it is that you want to say, and what it is you want to get across.
There.
Wait for the microphone. Wait for the microphone, please.
Joy Hendry. I'm a Scottish writer and editor. This is slightly tangential, but I don't think so. I would like to I hope that the conference is using the novel and the fiction as a kind of metaphor for the rest of literature. I've been slightly perturbed that poetry, especially as a voice against censorship, has not been more explicitly referred to in not just this session, but others too. I think that McDermott too has been slightly censored or misrepresented. He's been presented as somebody who's backward-looking and somebody who really was just defending Scotland as a tartan thing. I would like to put that there's a censored view of McDermott, that his view in taking the Scottish case at that conference was to point out the censorship that Scotland had suffered for years and years and years, and that was, you know, the main purpose of him. And he was, in fact, very forward-looking, very radical to his dying days. And I'll close with just a small anecdote about the unveiling of his statue in Langham, not a statue, a memorial plaque, a huge memorial thing. I think this is a lovely story. His widow was refused the permission to wave a red flag at the unveiling of that ceremony. And she actually turned to me and said, "They've censored him at last." But she had an answer to it. She came along in the pouring rain with a pair of bright red wellies, which she wore instead. Now, it really is about trying to find ways of keeping that spirit of the wanting to keep the mind open, the wanting to feel the need to assert the freedom, the self-censorship, and saying to yourself, yes, I am going to do it, even though it's difficult, and understanding the difficulties, how we get to it. And this point about education is absolutely crucial. What's happening in Arizona is still, to some extent, happening even in Scotland. There's still a battle, and probably in every country of the world. And how do we get to the place where the proper range of writing and thought is available to people? It's a huge problem. I don't have any answers to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then in front, yeah, sorry, first. Carlos, please.
Hello, I'm Carlos Gamerro from Argentina. I want to take something up that the lady just said about being also genre-specific in this discussion, because I don't think fiction can be discussed in the same terms as, say, poetry, journalism, or essay writing. I think when it comes to fiction, I'd like to invoke once again the spirit of 1962 in the person of William Burroughs. And I think one of his phrases, statements everybody knows, nothing is true, everything is permitted, is a wonderful summary of what fiction can do, and how censorship is not really, or self-censorship is something you can avoid in fiction, because after all you have characters. The characters are your alibi. They can say anything and you can say, well, I'm portraying sort of racist or a homophobe, but it's not me saying this. But of course, if you change to poetry or an essay or a sort of piece of journalism, there it's the author in his own voice that's speaking, and matters change, and the problem of self-censorship becomes maybe more acute. And that's one thing. Another thing connected with this is that we are also, this was said before about what if a poet, let's say, and I think poets are especially adequate for this example, wants to speak in the name of evil or of antisocial beliefs. After all, the French have sort of invented this concept of the poème maudit. We also say poeta maldito in Spanish. I find it interesting that in English you don't seem to have an English expression for that. But it's like, the poet that speaks, or the writer in general that speaks, against goodness, against what is politically correct. They had the Marquis de Sade, Baudelaire, Céline, while the Polish writer Gombrowicz did it at times. There is a very interesting case, I say interesting, and I'm not saying I like him, it's a little-known Chilean poet, Bruno Vidal, who said when Pinochet sort of left power, he had an epiphany, a sort of revelation, and he decided to become a pro-Pinochet poet. and he started writing poems defending Pinochet's regime. He called himself the poet of the repressors, which is really horrible. And at one point when he was challenged, he said, well, what do you think a poem about Modi is all about nowadays? Drugs, and sex? You know, we all find that very charming. I mean, if you want to really challenge views, you should do what I'm doing. I don't know if he's right, probably he's not, but I think it's an interesting issue to debate, and I would like to hear opinions from some other people in the room.
Thanks. Jackie Kay wanted to make a quick intervention.
Hello, my name's Jackie Kay and I'm from Scotland. I was interested in what Joy was saying there about literary forms, because it has been true that we've been focusing the last few days. I've been here every day on the novel, and I was hoping too that we were using the novel metaphorically to represent other forms. But the big question really, does the novel censor other forms? Is the novel itself a form of censorship? Because it seems to me that the other form, the form that would have been interesting to talk about today, is the form of memoir, because Patrick's really enlightening talk there was fascinating from the point of view of self-censorship, and it seems to me that there's no form where you self-censor yourself potentially more than in the memoir, and that memoirs that are really wonderful are wonderful because you haven't been censoring yourself. I mean, I wrote a memoir, and I found I had to struggle a lot with some of the questions that you were asking in your opening address. How do you represent people that are still alive and who might object to what you're saying? How do you take control of that? Do you have the right to? Do you have the right to write about people? And I decided in the end that I did have the right to write about my own life, because my birth father, my Nigerian father, had censored me. He'd said that I didn't exist. And even when I found him and met him, he said he wasn't going to tell his family about me. He said, if people were to know about you, they would lose their faith in God. I said, heavens, I didn't realize I was that powerful. And then I nearly went on and censored myself again, because he spent the first 2.5 hours of our meeting singing and dancing and praying around me, and I realized at one point in the middle of this 2.5-hour sermon that he saw me as his past sin, and I needed to be cleansed. So when he came to asking me after this, you said in your letter that you are not married and you don't answer to a man. So what do you mean by that? I nearly censored myself again. And I decided that I wouldn't. And I said, well, the woman that you spoke to on the phone, she's my partner. And he said, what do you mean? She's my partner. She's my partner. I've been with her for 15 years. And he went, you mean you're a lesbian? And I said, yes. And he went, okay. Which one of you is a man? But that was another form of censorship, because and that's the other point I wanted to raise, that not so long ago in this country we had Clause 28, which was an express form of censorship. We always try and talk about censorship as if it's something that happens abroad in other countries like Turkey and China and the countries that we've been talking about. But we had a very direct form of censorship, Clause 28, that happened in the British schools, where children were not allowed any material to even let them know that there was such a thing as homosexuality or lesbianism. And that censors some of our writers. The great poet Edwin Morgan, that just died a couple of years ago, only came out as a gay man in his 70s. And some of his early love poems, people assumed were written to a woman, and they were actually written to a man. So that was the other thing I wanted to say about self-censorship. But there's one last point, which is that as a black writer, if you create a negative black character in a novel, a poem, or a memoir, you're then sort of accused of kind of making a negative stereotype of a black person. Whereas if you're a white writer and you create a negative white character, you're not accused of that at all. So Alice Walker, for instance, when she published The Third Life of Grange Copeland, was accused, and there was kind of a great furore in the black community about her creating this supposed negative stereotype. So I find all of these issues of potential ways in which you can censor yourself and ways in which the public respond to you, and the kind of responsibility that you have as a writer to perhaps tell the truth, fascinating. One last little point. My adoptive dad, read my memoir before it was published, and he came across a bit which said that he'd been very threatened by me finding this Nigerian father. And he said, how would I be threatened when I wasn't even threatened of your mother, and she's in this country and he's all the way in Nigeria? And my mum said to him, because it's another father, John. And he said, well, can you put in your book, my dad disputes this? And I did, I put it in.
here in front here.
Yeah.
To politically.
Oh,
No. He's been raising his hand. Sorry.
They both have.
Okay, unless it's really short. No, he was first. But really short. Yeah. Sorry. Is it really short? Yeah. Because we're running out of time.
Not that we're censoring you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ewan Morrison, Scotland. Just on the subject of Edwin Morgan. There's something really interesting. Again, I keep quoting Michel Foucault because he was an anti-liberal, and I probably am anti-liberal too when it comes down to it. But he said culture is conflict. He was against the idea that there would be a world when there's no censorship. This is a liberal myth. So, for example, looking at, as we know, Michel Foucault was an active homosexual into BDSM, all kinds of extreme sexual activities, which he did not discuss. He was against being out. And I think you find that Edwin Morgan came out after Clause 28, and actually the gay community in Scotland rallied against Clause 28, and Clause 28 was actually a massive, it was actually good in a strange and paradoxical way for the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transvestite community. We actually have a richer culture in Britain as a result of an attempt by some bigots. So I would say we don't need to move towards a culture where there's no censorship. Culture is conflict. If you try to censor me, I will censor you, motherfucker. Culture is a battle. Thanks.
Thank you. Now to him, please.
I'm Matthias Politicki from Germany, so I seem to be on the bright side of censorship because I'm part of the Western Hemisphere, and I do pay every respect to any other China or Arizona resolution I will sign, of course, as a human being. But as a writer, I'd like to bring back the discussion to what happens to our languages being censored or self-censored in our political correct world. I think political correctness is the word for censorship in the Western world. So I have lots of problems in presenting my theses to the public without causing shitstorms either in the press or in Facebook. So just let me give you one example. Gypsies. You know all about them. They used to be called gypsies, let's say, till the late 70s. And then political correctness informed me that they are Sinti and Roma in Germany. Of course, in Switzerland, there's another tribe, so they have another name, but we are used to call them Sinti and Roma from then on. It sounds a bit ugly if you write it in a novel, but okay, you can adapt to it. But as soon as I came, for example, to Bucharest, and I had a taxi driver who was, well, he turned out not to be Sinti nor Roma. When I started the discussion with him, no, he said, I'm gypsy. And every gypsy I met, he said, use the word, please. We feel discriminated because we are not Roma nor Sinti. And I could give you a lot of examples like that. It makes me impossible, for example, to write about my black friends in Uganda, because as I addressed them as blacks, they said, oh, me no black, me Negro. So that's funny, political correctness. You have to adapt your contents to wherever it takes part in the world, and if you stick to the rules, you can stop writing. So I think remaining an author is being politically incorrect, especially in words.
Sorry, just a quick
think
statement.
Chika might have an opinion.
No. Yeah, I do, because I live in Belgium, in a country where people think it is okay to use the N word, because etymologically, it doesn't mean anything bad. There's nothing derogatory about it. And people would have arguments with me and tell me, well, it comes from Spanish and it means black, and what's the problem with you? You're too politically correct. I think words exist. Words do not exist in a vacuum. I think words exist in context. And I think that we should not pretend that words are innocent, because words are not innocent. And every word you use, says something about you, it says something about the person you're talking to. And I could say something about, just really short, and I'm not supposed to be talking, about one of the events we were at last night. And someone on the panel and someone in the audience insisted on saying that they were Rhodesians. And I said, I'm sorry, where is Rhodesia? You know? He said, well, you know, but Rhodesia does exist, and we are from Rhodesia. So I think that words are not innocent, and I think we ought to be careful. And I'm saying this as a person, as a black person, as an African, who lives in a country where people tend to think that words can be used anyhow. But, you know, it's not, I think maybe I should let somebody else talk.
Sorry, I don't want to be misunderstood. I want every respect to any black person, but it's just a matter of words to whom I write.
No, I don't think it's a matter of words. I think that sort of trivializes it.
In Uganda, they would.
But maybe 2 or 3 people in Uganda. I mean, I've seen someone, a black person in Belgium, tell me, well, you know, I don't mind being called the N-word because, you know, that's what I am. I almost slapped him, you know. So you always find stupid people because there is no cure for foolishness. You know what I mean? Yeah, of course, yeah. So, you know, but sorry, I shouldn't monopolize it, but thank you.
Actually, Hugh McDermott was capable of expressing the goodie and the baddie in the same couple of lines. He was in poetry, he could accommodate all. But I would actually like to suggest that I don't see any problem really for the novelist, certainly in our culture, the short story writer or the poet for that matter, in terms of censorship. I think we have a considerable degree of freedom. But you talk about the way in which language is loaded. I grew up at a time when socialist with a capital S and red with a capital R were highly pejorative words in the Daily Express. It was our paper of record in the Isle of Skye when I was growing up. The placing of a word can be incredibly important, and it can swing the way people feel about certain things. But my concern now is not so much about the placing of words, it's about the lack of placing of words. I think that there is a censorship of omission, a censorship of suppression. And if we're going to make protest on behalf of the Ladinos in Alabama, I think we also need to make a protest on behalf of the Kurds in Turkey, who are subjected to the most appalling abuse. They have a separate culture, they have a separate language, they have a resistance movement, their leader is in prison, he's a terrorist. I would say he's a freedom fighter, perhaps. But these people have been subjected to appalling conditions. I also find myself thinking, Patrick, your suggestion that we may have a slightly different, slightly more liberal approach to talking about things in the Middle East here compared to America, but it's still rather difficult for us to be critical of Israel, the only nuclear power in the Middle East that is threatening Iran, which has a rather unpleasant government that came about because America supplanted an elected government many years ago. Mossadegh's government was replaced by the Shah, who was thrown out by the current lot. And if they are rather unpleasant, blame America in the first place. But we don't really read too much about that. We'll read about these kind of things in The Guardian and 1 or 2 respectable papers. But by and large, the people in this country don't really have a very clear view of the issues that are actually troubling the world in these places. And I would blame the media as the prime agents of what we have to call a kind of censorship. It may be not a censorship of not saying, or not allowing to be said, but a censorship of not saying what should be said.
Thank you. We're almost running out of time, so I'll take 3 more questions, and I'll start with Ben, yeah, and then we'll go online.
There's a woman in a hijab as well,
Who?
and then a woman up there, and then a guy there.
Okay. Okay, 4 more questions, yes, because I would really love to hear from you. So Ben first, yeah, please. But really short, please.
Well, I just wanted to respond very, very briefly to the talk about political correctness and political incorrectness. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but I have noticed it quietly over the last 10, 15 years, whereby the supposed reaction to political correctness has slowly become the back door through which repugnant notions, quasi-secret racisms, and so on and so forth creep back into our universe.
Thank
so I think we should be very careful about our clever use of political incorrectness to not smuggle us back into a rather primitive state of mind that we're doing our best to get out of. Thank you.
Thank you. Then someone in the audience, their turn die, and then we'll come back to the writer and then to the audience and online, and then, yeah, that should see us. Yeah, I'm going to ask her, yeah, so we're going to go there and then. Your name, please, and...
Okay, my name's Tendai Uchu. I'm trying to think of any sphere of human activity that isn't regulated by the state, and I really can't think of any. If books didn't matter, then there would be no censorship. If art didn't matter, censorship wouldn't be there. Now, I'm certainly glad that in Germany, the government censors the sale of Mein Kampf. But my question is, when do you think we need censorship, Patrick? Because I think China was talking about instances in which objectionable things are available publicly in the public domain. And he said he might be against state censorship, but you need to talk to people. And I don't think that always works. So when do you think the government needs to step in and say, this area is regulated?
Why me?
Does anyone else want to answer that? Because I don't. There have been people who've been wanting to talk.
Oh,
and
sorry. He also, the guy in blue.
I'm
sorry, man in blue.
I am Michel Lebris from France. I would like to talk about another censorship. It's a censorship by intellectual circles themselves in France, but I'm not sure it's only in France. Each morning, they are saying they fight for liberties all around the world. But they forget that intellectuals was strongly linked with totalitarian, you see what I mean, during all the 20th century. And I'm not sure that it is finished. And after the Sarajevo war, I created a festival in Sarajevo. And it was a great moment to put together 100 about writers from all the area. But it was very more complicated when I invited them in France, in my festival in Saint-Malo. The discussion with Western intellectuals are quite impossible. And I remember Vidosar Stevanovic, which is one of the main opponents to Milosevic. And he says, but I don't understand. How is it possible that our nightmares are still your dreams? If you want to know what is communism, we are here. We can explain you what it is. Jails, spies in your own families, misery, gulag. But you don't want to listen to you, to us, because it's suppose you criticize ourselves because of your link with all these parties, all the communist parties. Okay. And I'm not sure it's finished because one of the stars of philosophy in France now is a guy who was the most fervent supporter of Pol Pot. And he's a star now. And he has not changed his mind.
Sorry, we've got only 5 more minutes.
Yeah, just to say. And it's not the only way, because these intellectual circles are able to give fatwas to his silence. On the people who disagree with them. And the another one, but well, we will talk about that in Saint-Malo next spring, about fiction is also and we never discuss of that. I don't know if it's only a French problem, but the influence of critics on literature, the power taken by critics all along the 20th century, and the way to be free from that, to deploying the full power of fiction.
Thank
now
you.
what it's
I'm
supposed
sorry, but I'd have to stop you because there are 3 other people who would really like to talk and we're running out of time.
I will invite some of these writers to
but
discuss
maybe we can continue
point,
later, yes.
next spring in Saint-Malo.
Thank you very much. Somebody wanted to quickly respond to Tendai, but please keep it really short. Yes, please. And then we'll go to the lady in the
I'm
hijab in
José
the
Rodrigues
audience.
Santos from Portugal. Actually, the question was already asked by the Italian student. I think that the limit is when you have a work that appeals to violence and threatens lives. That's why Mein Kampf is forbidden, and rightfully so. Actually, it's not the only book. There is another one called Milestones on a Road by Said Qutb, which is an Islamofascist book which defends jihad, offensive jihad against everybody. So these books are actually forbidden, and I think correctly so. Apart from the books that appeal for violence and are, in that sense, life-threatening, anything goes.
Thank you. And then to the lady, please, in the audience, and then we'll go online, and I think that's... Okay. That should be it.
Thanks very much. I'm Shabna Mustafa, and I'm the Director of Amnesty International Scotland. I just want to start off by thanking Juno for raising what he did. I wasn't aware of what was happening in Arizona, and I'm absolutely horrified. You know, you've got a state banning books by people just because they come from a particular, ethnic background. Amnesty's work is as part of our work. We do campaign and support writers who have been imprisoned, who have been tortured, who have been murdered for the things that they write. And I think it's very important at a festival like this that we remember them, and we also celebrate that the work that they've done. And I'm in absolute awe and fascination of those who keep doing what they do, and they'll go in prison, they're tortured, they come out and they keep writing about these issues and challenging injustice and campaigning for freedom of expression. And I absolutely loved Ben's suggestion there about writers coming together and taking action. So I do hope that you'll take that forward. I just want to say, even though we haven't come to an agreement as to what we mean by censorship when we're going, the fact that we're having this discussion here today it is important, and we need to keep having that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Kim, because I like her very much. Very short. I know she will keep it short, so we can quickly fit her in before we go online.
My name is Kim Thuy. I'm from Canada, Vietnam originally, and I left Vietnam as a boat people. And recently, my book was a little bit about boat people. And some Vietnamese publishers wanted to publish it, but they said we'll have to take out all the pages where you talk about boat people. And I said, then there's only the cover left. So they said, so I said, let's wait until history is ready to embrace this issue. But then the press, I just want to thank the press actually, because they do play a role. So some Vietnamese newspapers decided to have interviews with me and publish some excerpts of the book. They translated it themselves, and now the book is in some bookstores, on some shelves. They're not translated into Vietnamese, but at least the French and the English version are available in Vietnam. So the press does play a role, and as well as the reader. Because there were some readers who were interested, and they asked the bookstores to have them.
Thank you.
So
thank you,
the
Kim.
press, and thank you, the reader.
Thank you, Kim. And the final word to our online audience, please.
This conversation is going it's evolving online. There's a lot of discussion about Arizona, about freedoms of speech, about countries where writing and writers are repressed. And that's taking up about half the online conversation. The other half is very much talking about the market, about how e-publishing and e-books can open up and democratize reading, but there are others coming back, and the other side of the argument is there are those who don't understand yet these modern forms of communication, and that it can be dangerous, in fact, that some people just react very quickly on Twitter and things are taken out of context quite seriously. And I'd just like to say that while we've been speaking, Patrick, your article has gone online on The Guardian, and you already are retracting comments. So far, they're pleasant.
Second.
So far, they're pleasant.
Thank you. I'd like to invite John Burnside, who's kindly agreed to summarize.
John Burnside.
My first impulse is to self-censor and then manage to keep within the time limit by not saying anything, just standing like this. But I won't. My heading for this is Patrick Ness slams bad book award. that preempts tomorrow's headlines. It's been a fantastic. I think it's been my favourite, certainly, discussion of the week. It's been fantastic. Lots of great views coming out, and we could have gone for 4 more hours, I think. I'm going to race through trying to summarise what's been said. But I'm also going to try and respond to a challenge that Ben Okri sent me before we started, to actually put a haiku in here somewhere. His initial challenge was to summarize the whole thing in a haiku, but I thought that wasn't quite possible, so we may find a haiku slipping in, let's see. And I shall look at you each time I think I'm doing it, and if you nod, then you agree that I got one in, okay? Wonderfully chaired by Chika, and a wonderful summary of some of the things that are going on around the world right now as we sit here. The Pussy Riot, Dazed and Confused case, the writers in prison in China, and a summarizing of what I think is the main question, freedom of expression versus responsibility. We didn't get into that as much as perhaps I thought we were going to do until about the end, but at least we did get into it. And Patrick gave us a wonderful talk, and sent out food for thought, and the kind of question of how we self-censor when we're afraid, in effect, of being misunderstood or being seen as, in the case of the veil, racist, and also whether or not we would dare now to write the kind of book that Salman Rushdie wrote, where Muhammad is seen as a flawed character. It isn't that we might not want to write that, but would we dare? I think that's what you were saying. No, okay, not at all.
We'd all agree that we should, but would we dare?
Well, would we dare? That's why, yeah. And my first attempt at a haiku. Do self-censors say what is worst in my writing is what I omit? Okay, not quite there yet. But this is one of the essential issues that came up again and again. Writers second-guessing themselves, and perhaps sometimes dodging issues that they should have addressed because they're afraid of getting it wrong, and the possible risks involved in that. Would we trust a writer who in every other way agreed with us, but was anti-abortion, say, and wrote about it and spoke about it? It's a really interesting question, challenging question. So the question is about what you don't say. So, some talk about the internet bringing out the kind of sectarian side in us, that somehow the internet encouraged us to be gladiatorial. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Then the most shocking thing that's happened to me for quite a long time, Chika proposed replacing sex with bread. I think in my case, I don't really need any more bread. Patrick brought up the question of writing as negotiation, and part of that is negotiating with publishers. This reminded me of an old Peter Cook and Dudley Moore sketch, where Peter Cook, I think, played the man from the BBC, and Dudley Moore, the aspiring scriptwriter, who comes into the room, and Peter Cook is holding the script and saying, "I see you've got a lot of the C word in here." And he said, "Yeah, it's integral to the plot. And you've also got a lot of the F word in here." And he said, "Yeah, that's integral to the plot too." "Well, I think there's too many of the F word." He said, "Well, how about if I give up some of the F words for some more C words?" And the negotiation goes on. It's a very funny sketch if you haven't heard it. The next point was raised can self-censorship be a skill, for example, for young adult writers? And that brought us to the idea of the limits of what a writer can write, or what a writer, perhaps using the conference's favorite word, should write. Then the question, a little bit of a debate came up, repeating a debate we've had already so far, art versus market. And it seemed, at least to some, too polarized, and to others not polarized enough. We all self-censor, and we should out of consideration for others. I can't really read my own writing. I constantly censor myself when I scribble. There's a cultural censorship. John Calder raised the point, cultural censorship is based on authoritarian regimes and repressive religions. Can we use technology to fight censorship was the question that was then raised, and it came up again at the end there. But in fact, again, we didn't perhaps get into that as much as we might have done. In China, there's no law of censorship. Instead, there's a kind of Kafka-esque scenario which makes censorship possible, and it sounded wonderfully Byzantine, actually. And then there was the suggestion that maybe the best thing to do is just publish, and nobody will care anyway. And which is, I think, in many ways how so-called Western democracies work. It's called absorption in my book. It simply means that there's enough kind of flab in a society to absorb almost anything. That's my view. But we didn't get into that at all, and I kind of was interested in why we didn't. Then Juno made an important point about what's happening in Arizona. I guess many of us were really shocked by that. And Ben suggested we send a message to Arizona. I think we should. And I think many people in the room feel that we should get together later and figure out what to do about that. Nick pledged support from the festival. And Scottish Pen responded with talking about the empty chair that already exists. There was some points made about the subtlety of censorship. The censorship isn't always just brutal, and it's not just always the black pen line through the word, but it's often subtle. Subtle in ways like losing friends or not getting commissioned anymore for jobs, and that is part of it. That question was then asked, has anybody here been a censor? And I'm a teacher too, and I've been in that situation, wanting to censor someone. And for much the same reasons, I think, as you. And of course, one has to let people speak if one believes in freedom of speech. There was a question about what constitutes a news story, and that was an interesting one for me. I think if we had longer time, we might go into that a bit further. I myself would confess to saying that I'm too easily dismissed this as what constitutes a news story as a soundbite, but that's not necessarily the case. Editors can give people the right to express a view, even though they don't necessarily agree with it. One of the things that's come out through the week is that we've often talked about fiction, and there are poets here, and some of the poets don't even write fiction. So there's a sense that poetry is being overlooked somewhat here. And so here we go again. This is a haiku about the debate for the overlooked poets. Almost. Oh yeah, okay. I'll keep trying. So now I really can't. Oh, then we're talking about the poète maudit, and we don't have that term in English, which is, I mean, if you know English poetry, you can see why. You know, you think England could produce a Baudelaire? Impossible. Or indeed Scotland. Am I being provocative there to the Scots? I know Scots, okay. Jackie Kay raised the point about my memoir writing, and it's something I responded to very strongly myself, I've done it too, that question of how do you write about living people? And do you leave stuff out? There's also the question of creating negative stereotypes. Is that the 2-minute warning? Well, the question of creating...
Well, it kind of is, accidentally.
50-second warning. There's also the question of creating negative stereotypes. My negative stereotypes might be of drug users, for example. Everybody's got their own negative stereotypes they create. There's an interesting discussion, which I felt could go further, about the censorship of language by politically correct, and then a response which said politically correct, political correctness, the attack on political correctness can be a kind of backdoor for repugnant views, which we're trying to leave behind. The point that was made, that I love this phrase, words are not innocent, and I cling to that. I cling to the guilt of words. As an occasional poet. Why do we need censorship? For example, as in Mein Kampf. And I think this was nicely summarized, and I've actually forgotten in my haste to finish at the end there, who actually said it. Censorship is needed, was it you, I think? Is needed when a book appeals to violence and threatens lives. And I think that's a nice summation. It's a starting point for when we might need censorship. From the online comments were about or perhaps failure to address online activity and how online activities can help defeat censorship, or at least counter it. And then the last point, perhaps, is that the energy of a culture means that there will always be censorship and always be a battle between the censor, the writer, and the reader. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So thank you to all the contributors, and the discussion, of course, continues online and in the yard and outside. And tomorrow's session will be the future of the novel, my favorite. Okay, so please, hopefully see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. We did well. We did well.